Hey everybody, thank you for joining us this afternoon. NeoCon, I hope everybody's show is going wonderfully. I'm Mark Wilson, Global Design Editor at Fast Company. And something interesting, I've been at Fast Company now, I think this is my 11th year, which is, in journalist years, a billion, like literally a billion. And someone like literally an hour ago asked me how our coverage had changed over that time. And what often occurs to me is there are two topics that we were probably pretty lax in covering a few years ago, and those are the two biggest topics in design right now: sustainability and equity, right? And I don't think I need to tell everybody in this room that the way these two topics intersect is incredibly complicated, cannot be oversimplified, but at the same time, I believe we are all here today to talk about it, to unravel it, and to really pull at the thread. So I will introduce you to our esteemed panelists. First, we have George Bandy. He's the president and CSO of Fiber Industries. In a former life, he was also the head of worldwide circular economy at Amazon and the former chairman of the board for the United States Green Building Council. Then we have Sequoyah Hunter-Cuyjet. She began her career working on high-end interiors for residents in New York and DC. Today, she is the VP of Determined by Design, a design practice committed to improving affordable housing. She's also one of the only Native Americans in the country to hold an MFA in interior design. And then we have Khoi Vo, the CEO of ASID. For 15 years before that, he both taught and did all sorts of work for Savannah College of Art and Design. And my understanding is you're very instrumental in connecting private business with the school to actually sort of open up opportunities for designers. So everybody, this is our wonderful panel. We're going to get into it. So I'd like to start off with a bit of a provocation and let everyone pick and pull at it as they will, which is with design, with sustainability, sustainability is a luxury. I want to put that idea out there in the world, and I'm curious what everyone has to say about it.
Well, I couldn't agree more that sustainability is a luxury, especially when it comes to new legislation that's coming out that's putting a lot more stricter requirements on sustainability and like green products. And it's really stipulated for affordable housing, and it's not really being stipulated for market rate or luxury housing as it should be. And a lot of those products are also not equitable in terms of their style and design.
So I would say, Sequoyah mentioned something today that reminded me that when you design a building, you're not designing for the building's sake. You're designing for the people, the community, those who will occupy, work, live, and thrive inside of that space. And you have to recognize that there were people who were here years ago who knew how to live sustainably before you designed that space. And I think often we don't always give credence to those who knew how to live sustainably and with social equity prior to us delivering the things that we deliver today. And so we try to control them. Similarly, we try to control Mother Nature. But I think that we have to start giving some level of respect to the people who we design, create, and deliver these particular spaces for.
And I'll say it is a luxury in the sense that you can see it in kind of the educational model, right? It's not a core part of the curriculum. So it really ends up being something that, you have to be at a certain level or at a certain institution before it becomes an issue that is being discussed or even being introduced to you. So I think that, obviously that's a problem and we need to figure that out so that it's equitable. It's not a luxury. It shouldn't be a luxury.
Yeah, I feel like whether it's architecture, interior design, fashion, home goods, we're at a time right now where I feel like companies are coming to us as consumers and just people of this world and sort of enticing us to live sustainably, right? But also putting it on us, right? Like it's very much, I feel like, on the consumer right now to sort of make that choice, to pay the extra tax, to do whatever else, and that obviously can't work for everyone.
Yeah, I think some of the trends that you see are not really sustainability, it's marketed sustainability. So it's what I call a placebo of sustainability. It's, and it's interesting because, years ago, before I'll date myself, I started this career in 91, 92 as sustainability officer at a university. And nobody wanted to hear it. It wasn't until 2006 that the first university made sustainability a curriculum course. 2010, that means those would have been the first people to graduate with sustainability. That's a short period of time for something to be in existence, for so many people to be making a whole lot of money creating this placebo of brand and awareness. So it's always interesting to see some of the shifts that happen. And you know, we as people, we like to dissect things to make things comfortable for ourselves, and then privatize the wealth and then socialize the risk. And that's one of the challenges with sustainability and it has always been, is that people find ways to privatize the valuable pieces that they can control and try to articulate to create value for themselves, but then they socialize the risk. No different than landfills and other things, not in my backyard for a landfill, or no difference than, you know, companies that start tracking their sustainability from 2015 as if the Industrial Revolution didn't happen until then. And so nobody counts all the greenhouse gas emissions that happened before that, like you can't. If your calculator works for that, it also works going backwards. But
You're saying carbon neutrality or whatever else has to be retroactive, not just
or at least
proactive.
you ever got in line at a restaurant and somebody paid for your food? At least pay it forward sometimes. So let's look at handprints rather than footprints. I think sometimes people lose track of the value that's available for them to think that they can start when they wanted to start, rather than looking at the holistic aspect of what they've caused.
Any thoughts from you two on that? Tough act to follow when George gets going. I know.
Yeah. And it's one of the things where when we talk about like sustainability, it's really this question of like, what does it mean? And it's placed in this relationship between humans and the earth. But when we start to talk about sustainability in a regenerative thought process, there's just the need to indigenize one's thinking and processes of thinking, because being Shinnecock and born and raised on a reservation, growing up in a craft culture, there is an innate understanding of my relationship to the earth. So sustainability is not something that I can quantify in a way that feels genuine to me, because that respect is always given. And that mindset of like everything is political, you put your money where your values are. You know, we all walk around with cell phones and we don't even understand the materials or the amount of mining, or the miners who like mine the cobalt mines for the things that are in your phone to make all of our technology run. And is that a sustainable life for those people? Absolutely not. So in this question of like, oh, how can we think more sustainably? Like, we have to stop and really understand. And yes, like go all the way back to place ourselves where we are and understand the choices and decisions that we're making every day.
Do you feel like there's a inherent tension, though? I mean, the idea of like privatizing sustainability. I mean, you talk about sustainability to you is about the connection to the earth and craft, right? And this being like this person to the earth connection that's there. And I imagine there are natural checks and balances that you will make when you are extracting something yourself and creating something yourself. When you put that into a private corporation, do you feel like that can be translated? Because obviously we are amidst thousands of products that are claiming to be sustainable here. Like, is it doable? Is it a lost cause? You know, if we don't have our hands on craft ourselves.
I don't know if it's necessarily a lost cause, but I think that it's, again, retraining your brain to think differently, turn the problem over, right? Is the purpose of having a business to be at maximum profitability, right? Is that sustainable in a regenerative way? Absolutely not. In order to achieve that, you have to take advantage of someone or something at some point. And so that's a hard reality to start to break down and really make decisions from a different place, and make a decision from what is going to be the best for the earth, what's going to be best for the humans that inhabit the earth, right? not what can I get off of people, what can I get off of the earth, what can I take? Thinking about what I can give makes that idea of profitability, it just turns it over, and you have to look at it a different way.
Yeah. And Mark, I'm just really, I mean, I'm glad to see that there's this tide turn, the tide is turning in the sense that, as George was saying, not so many years ago, this was kind of a luxury, this was kind of an additive thing that we were doing, the project's almost done. Let's add some sustainability factors into it, or in education, it's like you learn all of your skill set as a designer. Oh, okay, let's take a class in sustainability. But now I think it's really great to see this generation. It's inherently something that they expect, and I should say they demand it, right? And they're voting for it in the ways of who are they going to go work for, what products they're going to support, what organizations they want to support, and I think that's a really promising thing. We have a lot to do and continue to do. And I think the other point Mark, you just addressed, you were saying there's thousands of products. We were just in a summit talking about the idea of translating this information. We have a lot of data, but that data doesn't mean much if we can't bring it down to everybody, right? It can't just stay at this level of only those who've dedicated their life or their career to learning about sustainability. It has to come down to the user. It has to come down to the small 1-2 person firm that's practicing, that doesn't have the bandwidth to decipher the list of like 3,000 red items and what does that mean, and I think that's a big thing that our organization is trying to do, is to try to kind of make that connection, make the translation and make that connection.
So one of the things I always think about, are you designing a space, a building, a community, a product to make a living in sustainability, or are you designing that space, product, community to leave a legacy? There's a difference. And if your whole objective is to design it to make a living, then you really haven't embraced the concepts of sustainability in terms of the direction in which they were founded. You're just doing it because that's what you need to do in order to win the next project. And if you're really trying to leave a legacy, then you embed yourself into, I always think that even when I get ready to walk on stage, as many times I've done, I am uncomfortable as hell. Every time. Is everything right? Have you thought about this? And if you're not uncomfortable with the roles that you have, then you probably need to check yourself. Because I feel like if you don't get uncomfortable about something that you're doing in terms of creating this space that people are going to have to live in, and you're going to walk away and you're going to leave a community with something that you have designed, developed, or put your products into, and you're not concerned on what happens when that building gets 30 years old or 50 years old, or when the product wears out, or when it uglies out. Like, if those things aren't in your mind when you leave that space, you're probably part of the problem.
Yes, but please don't make spaces that are just gray and white.
I agree.
This is a big thing.
Totally inappropriate.
I mean, this is a huge topic, and Sequoyah, you've talked about this. I mean, you called this phrase like seared in my head forever. Is like, use the term poverty aesthetic.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Yeah, that's what it is. And this has a lot to do with how we teach interior design. That the thought process is that interior design is an extension of architecture, but it's not, right? Interior design is about ornamentation and adornment, and that's a very human thing. Every people trace their ancestry, and there's ways that they would adorn themselves, right? This is an extension, that built space is an extension of yourself. So, you have this sort of modernist canon of both architecture and architectural theory and design theory that stripped away ornamentation and design. And early affordable housing projects have a very consistent material palette. This was about purity of materiality. You have VCT, you have cinder block, you have large glazed tile. And there's this really intrusive color blue. Those same materials can be found in affordable housing, public schools, and prisons. And so you create a design pipeline of an aesthetic for someone to be comfortable in some of the most inhumane color palettes and material palettes, because someone thought that decoration and adornment didn't matter. But that is part of our legacy as humans, to decorate and adorn. Like, we're sitting in this building right now, right? Like, architecture isn't just decoration for the earth, right? So it's something where most designers don't think of that, because that's not part of your design education. Then you'll look at the same sort of philosophy of materiality, purity of materiality, no ornamentation or decoration, and you'll switch it into a different setting that's typically a non-Black or brown community, and it's praised. It's so simple. And it becomes something where this type of visual information is not taught in schools for designers to understand how they're designing in a destructive, culturally destructive way, and there's a level of erasure that happens then within your design. When everything is designed for everyone, it's designed for no one, right? There's no intentionality there.
Right, and you can trace it all the way back to our education. I don't know how many of you guys read and were told that, ornament and crime, right? Adolf Loos's book was so, instrumental in at least my education, and it's really sad to think about that, because now I look back and one of the first things he's talking about is like, only savages have tattoos, right? Only those that would scar their skin and decorate their skin are not considered part of society or civilized society. And then you can kind of trace it all the way to, down to Corbusier and the international style. Like, then it gets hidden as hygienic. Let's turn everything white. Let's turn everything, smooth, so that we can have, a place that's safe, right? And it does, right? It erases identity, and it becomes a problem. And it's just the fact that it's an international style. You start to chip away at the local, understanding of context. We're no longer celebrating regionality. So it's systemic, right? And I'm glad we're talking about it.
And the crazy thing is that you heal better, feel better, and think better in environments that are eclectic, like outside in nature, where you're trying to bring nature in. This whole concept of biophilic design, bringing nature inside, like, to do that and then say that this is what makes me feel better, that to me is like, I don't get it. Like, and it's like, okay, well, we want this over here, but we know that this is better. Oxymoron.
Just to pull a very small thread here too. Talking about sort of cinder block reuse, across different spaces. I think about a lot of the European design sensibility, and the idea is, well, of course, we're being earnest about the material. We're going to put the material first, but that philosophy, when applied to a material that is sort of not like the finest material necessarily, right? But a budget material obviously feels different, and it connotes something very different to sort of anybody inside of it.
Well, also, Mark, you just said it, right? It's a European aesthetic.
Yeah.
Right? And so how does a European aesthetic apply to a Latino community? How does that European aesthetic apply to a Black community, right? It doesn't. That is like packaging colonial design and saying, here, in modern times.
Right.
Take that.
This is something you'll deal with in your practice.
Yes.
I guess I would love if you would break down a little bit about, your practice, you do come into buildings, right? And you sort of make wrongs right. But I assume you're not doing it in a solutionistic way. But I imagine that we could all learn a little bit about some of that process and how you can do it earnestly rather than, I guess, prescriptively.
Sure. So our team actually goes through a deep dive of, so we look at the land, right? This is like who were the first keepers of a particular area of land. We go into the site, what is the colonial history? Then we go into sort of the state, the city, the neighborhood, and then we look at the communities, plural, that are in that neighborhood. And we look at all the stories. So we design with a concept, and a concept is a statement. I like to say that it's like a love letter, but it's a statement of intention for a community, for their future. And from there, that's sort of where we draw all of our design inspiration. And so none of our projects look the same. This is where then we are constantly in this tension between like healthy materials or sustainable materials and materials that are human, like for these communities that typically will have poverty aesthetic materials that are supplied for their living spaces. We want to like bring wood look. New wood is a product that we've been trying to sort of use, but it cost 3 times, 10 times the amount of an LVT, right? And I would rather, and I think that my team would rather, like choose an LVT if that is going to be a more human feeling. If we're working with communities that have never been able to sort of have that warmth in any of their apartments. We always sort of are resident forward when we think about that.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, Sequoyah said some great stuff here. The actual design process, right? I'm so glad to hear. We talk a lot about kind of design through empathy versus participatory, right? And so I think that's a really key thing in understanding that process, which starts at the very beginning of the design phase, where you have to involve more people.
Absolutely.
Right, and us as designers have to be cognizant that although we might be empathetic to our stakeholders that we're serving, we might not know all the answers to the things that they are going through or what they need, and so it needs to be a more, there's more dialogue there to
And
right?
also, just to be clear, like we're very intentional about our language.
Mm-hmm.
So our stakeholders are always the residents.
Yeah.
And we are in partnership with our developers to serve them. And that is always how our team and the amazing designers at Determined by Design, they design with that in mind, that they're in service to these residents. This is their home. It's always, would I live there? Would I feel comfortable with my family living there? So we're always elevating that standard.
So I'm going to turn it to the host, and I'm going to ask you a question.
Oh.
So with the things that you're hearing today, how do we convey that more from a media perspective to more masses, to be able to try to put this type of thought concept or energy around these things that are being spoken from a residential and from a commercial standpoint of the importance of social equity and sustainable design being more woven into that, because people read what you write and they respect a lot of what you put out there.
Sometimes.
Is there
Sometimes I
ways-
just read the beginning and skim to the end too. It's a little thing.
Are there ways that we could do a better job of communicating this and getting it out so that more people would be enticed to engage at a higher level?
I mean, I think it's a challenge of the job. I'd say this is something I know I mentioned, but I write about design. I write about all sorts of design, right? And so it's like it might be industrial design, and it might be how we create spaces. It's really the whole gamut. But I think what's changed, and the way I talk to our writers now about what's changed about the way I think we should be covering things, is that we used to ask, like, is this a sustainability story? Is this an equity story? Is this a product story? It's like, no, everything's everything, right? And so. Look, people love reading about products. This is a secret that I don't think is a secret to no one, right? But we can often tell a product story, and then we can often talk about, well, like, how does it sort of work within these other levers? And I think that that's just something we have to do like every time now.
Yeah.
And that's not like the only way in, right? But I think that it has to be a somewhat systemic change to the way we cover topics.
It actually is a practical way, right? Because as interior designers, we're looking at product, right? That's how we're making changes. Our team, we were looking at the sit to stand desk, and it's a tangent, I know. And my co-leader, Kia Weatherspoon, said, I just usually just spec them in there. Like if the budget is right, let's just put them in there. Because our team has struggled with trying to get certain things on projects because they ask. And I think I've had a conversation about how I'm a big fan of hide the vegetables, where as a designer, like it's important to read about product that makes a difference, that moves that needle, that shifts everything. And you don't always have to be in a position to be an educator, because your development partners or your partners, your clients, might not be interested, but if it achieves the dollar amount, like why not? Just do it. Just make the choice, move forward, like be the authority that you are, right? They don't know the product, you do. You have the power to constantly make the change. And every project you do, you can just like make a choice to use a better product.
And I think when you said expressing that and making it more comprehensive in the writing about a product, but that then raises the standard for the people making the products to know that that narrative needs to be in.
Oh, 100%. I mean,
So-
it is a big difference. Like people are far more, I'd say, prepared for these questions. But the other good news is like you can get the expert on the line, right? And you can get the expert working in the company who can actually say, well, this is a study we did, or this is a study we didn't do, right? Like this is what we know, this is what we think, this is what we hope.
Makes a difference.
Well, and that's also why organizations like ASID, like being able to like sort of give us the, I think there's probably people too young to know this, but the cliff notes on what we should be using.
Right. Yeah, Cliff Notes, summary or translation, right? I think that's a big part of it. It's like making sure everyone's speaking on the same level, making sure everyone understands. And I mean, it's not an easy task because, like you're saying, there's the designers who are here trying to, go through the challenges of every day, kind of running their practice and solving these challenges. Who has the time to figure this stuff out in order to empower you to make these decisions, right? And I think that's a big part of what we as an organization really are trying to take on to make sure that we can bridge that gap and do that. So.
Is that a tough tension for you? I mean, because obviously some members of ASID probably are much better sort of on the spectrum of their work in terms of like equity or especially I think sustainability versus others. Like how do you sort of balance that?
Well, I think part of it is being able to collaborate with a lot of really great partners, right? So, you have your designers. We have such great people on our certain committees that we have to kind of drill down on these issues. Sequoyah sits on several of them. One day, George, I'm going to convince you to sit on.
I knew that was coming.
Right. Expect an email.
I like how
tomorrow.
you waited to make the ask on stage.
Right. He's not going to say no,
It's
is
like
he?
the way to do it.
And so, and then, of course, we're partnering with, USGBC, IWBI. And again, they're coming to us with this dialogue of, we're the experts. We have this information. We don't know how to translate it. We don't know how to bring it to so that it becomes, at the start of this conversation, Mark, so it's not a luxury. Mm-hmm. That it's a right for everyone to be able to understand and to be able to use. And so.
And I know that this is difficult, but I think that the more comprehensive the organizations are that actually put this forward, so ASID, IIDA, AIA, USGBC, and they don't like to hear this, but like I think that the more voices that you have at the table, the more powerful the message will be to the audiences that like to pick and choose. I don't like to pick and choose, but I think that people do for whatever reason. But I think that there's much more power. I feel like there are some things that don't have to be divided. I'll step away from design just to give you an example. Mm-hmm. What are the things that Lead Well and Living Building can agree on? Diversity and inclusion? Yes. Climate change is a necessary thing that they need to address? Yes. And health and wellness. So I'm a big proponent that all three of them should get together and figure out what are those three things that we can agree on, and then let people pick and choose the rest. But I think that there's opportunities for us to do that in multiple ways, because the more divisive we become, the less we're able to push the envelope where we need to, not for ourselves, but for the people who actually need it. Mm-hmm. Right? Imagine how complex it is. I told this story, and I can't remember the young lady's name. Mine's going bad while I'm on the stage underneath these McDonald lamps. But I told this story when I was a chairman of USGBC. We were in New Orleans right after the hurricane, the real bad hurricane, and we were working with Home Depot and Lowe's, and we were handing out stuff, and they were doing these retrofits of these homes. And the gentleman from either Home Depot or Lowe's said to this elderly lady in her house coat with her bonnet on, says, "Hey, one of these days you should consider putting a nest in your home." She says, "Well, baby, how much does it cost?" And he told her how much it cost. She's like, oh no, if I got to choose between my medicine and a nest, I choose my medicine all day. The lesson was like, she didn't care anything about reducing her energy bill because she needed to make a decision about her medicine or investing in something else. So you have to meet people where they are. And sometimes we try to ask people to do things that are out of their scope. Most people that you're talking to about climate change in inner city communities, they can't see it. Because it's not something that you can visually see. You can show them all the hurricane, but they can't see it happening every day. The reality of not having a grocery store in their neighborhood, they can see that. Gentrification coming in their community, they can see that. Right? And so these things are things that you're asking people to overcome for your comfort of saying, hey, we're going to move toward and, try to help move this climate change thing. And so sometimes you have to make sure that you recognize not just where you are, but who you're talking to and who that audience is and their level of understanding of what it is. And that's where that gap between like us speaking so articulately around the aspects of sustainability and their impact in these particular communities to, hey, we need to try to get you a grocery store here where you can get some fresh fruits and vegetables. And those are things that you have to recognize. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that gap, and that's where you should be uncomfortable. On every project, not just some projects. Did you really touch those communities that are around this building you just built? Did you make things accessible for them? Are there things that add value to them in the community? And I think sometimes we lose sight of that because we're so busy trying to move on to the next project. We've met the criteria for whatever certification we met. We feel like we did good around the buildings, all that kind of great stuff. But like, did you really impact not just the people in the community? Did you leave a legacy in that community for people that will come later on? And that's hard.
So, George, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Cool. So do you feel sorry, Mark, do you feel like well and lead are just sort of like box checking after a while for like a lot of firms where it's just, because on a very practical level, like I worry about all of these light fixtures with integrated LEDs.
Yeah, I feel like there's opportunity to continue to increase the lowest of these by having these certifications. I think sometimes the intent was to create a bandwidth of people raising the bar for all buildings. I appreciate them because I was a part of it, but I understand that there's a need for, like, if you look at buildings that are built now, they're much better because of it.
Yes.
Right? The leased buildings now have a code change that happened because of this. And I think if you don't continue with these certifications, then what happens is that, now what I will say that I really struggle with is that it stops with architects and designers. And the people who really need to be impacted is the installers, the people who are going to be occupying the space, housekeeping, people who are doing things that we don't really speak to, subcontractors in the community, landscapers who will take care of the space. Like you talk about xeriscaping and then you don't tell the person who's actually going to be taking care of it and they come right out with pesticides the next day. You kind of like, what the hell is that?
Yep.
Right? So
Yeah.
like, or putting palm trees in Alaska. Like, what? So like those things are the things where I still think that there are gaps. And I think if you're not continuing to keep smart people engaged, that we won't be able to kind of bring those people along. Solar installers, wind developers, different communities that you haven't really tapped into. So I think that if we don't continue to kind of keep certifications moving in a way to change code, because more codes have been changed since these certifications came about than in the history of built environment. So like, I think if you don't do that, then you start to become stagnant. I think that we're stagnant enough. It's too late to be stagnant. Just my thoughts.
No, I mean, just the other idea of worrying about sort of all the other stakeholders involved with the project. I was just reading how we don't have enough electricians to basically switch to like the green electricity projects we want to do. So we can have the core technology, we can have the design, we can have the legislation, and we like don't have the boots on the ground to like run the wires and do the installations, which is amazing.
That's a great point, but this also comes back to my point about like indigeneity and indigenous like thought process, of regenerative thought process, where like everything you do is an impact. So like getting involved locally, maybe sitting on or paying attention to your school board elections, trying to have practical things like shop classes, wood shop, all of those things that have been taken out of education, which was an entryway for people to then go to technical school because they were really passionate about it, right? So like you have to understand like it's all reciprocal. So there's no electricians because we've never sparked that interest in a young person to go into that field.
No art, no
Yeah.
plumbing, none of that. They just took all of that out, and now you're looking around like, hey, I can't get a plumber. No shit. So it's like, how do you like, and part of it is that the responsibility, like we want the finished product, but we don't look back at like, what does it take in order to sustain it, keep it going? Like all of the deferred maintenance is because you didn't have people to do the work. Or the people that you had to do the work didn't know that you were moving the cheese around what the work was, right? The nest is up here, but like they're still looking for the furnace down in the basement, right? Like, so like how do you educate, bring along, lift as you climb, add value, because we don't really delve into the inner city community of where you're actually building the space. You should be using electricians and plumbers that live in that community where you're actually building that space in order to get the value of return, because then they will invest in hiring more people and training them so that now you know that that's going to be sustained for a period of time. But instead we bring, I won't call any names, from outside of wherever, and they come in and they set it up and then they leave, and then nobody really knows how to maintain it appropriately, and then it gets bad, and then
Money's gone from the community.
it's gone. Exactly. There's no financial reason for people to build the business locally there to add value.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I have a slight shift here. Where I have this product question that's been in my mind, and I guess I'm curious on how everybody here would chew on it. Which is that, did I cut you off?
No.
Oh, okay. Which is basically, there's sort of a fork in the road in product development I see right now, which is one, things being built to last forever, like the perfect, wonderful thing that will last you a lifetime, and then the thing being built to last 3 years, a year, whatever, and sort of disappear into the ground. Both make me a little bit uncomfortable, and I feel like both 100% impact sort of sustainability and equity. I worry about communities sort of being asked to rebuy things they don't need to rebuy, putting sort of a luxury tax on things they buy. At the same time, it is absolutely ridiculous that everything we have lasts for 1 million years or whatever. So where are people at?
I was just, this is a personal thing. I remember, I think our microwave just broke. And the conversation is not, let's call the repairman. The conversation is like, we have to buy a new one because no one's gonna ever come out to fix it. It's not something our culture is used to anymore, right? And that's a problem. And again, it goes back to the things that we're all saying, which is it's a systemic issue, right? It results in things about designers making decisions on, do we design something that lasts a long time or something that will be obsolete in 3 years? But on that other side is the whole support network that's no longer there. Yeah. We took away printmaking, we took away woodworking, we took away the trade schools, and now we're all standing around running going, we don't have tradesmen, we don't have people that can do this work anymore. And so I think it's hard to kind of answer that without referring back to the whole ecosystem, right, of what's going on. So.
It's sort of the same, right? 3 years or a lifetime. What's a lifetime? 100 years? 105 if you're lucky? Like, so this idea of like, it's made forever, like, I mean, we're in like a crisis with plastics right now because they last forever. And they've like leached into sort of every aspect of our lives and we don't know the outcome. So in that conversation, my concern is always like the idea of innovation, right? Have we not learned, like innovation brought us here with all of these things, this building, these finishes, but like what good is it if it doesn't resolve the Anthropocene, right? If it doesn't make a dent in like rejuvenating the earth. So 3 years or a lifetime, it's the same thing.
So I always look at it like this. Nature does both. It's just smart by how it does it. We just aren't smart by what we do. Like, we don't think about the end. We don't design with the end in mind. We design with cost in mind. We design with all the other personal attributes that we have that make us feel good about what we do inside and mind, like it can last forever and still be beautiful, right? And you can still have that lasting, but are you designing that for an apartment that's not gonna be around for a long time? Or are you designing that for a museum that is gonna be around for a long time? And using the right materials in the right space is critically important. And sometimes we use things just for, we want to be different, or it was less expensive, or whatever the case might be, and then you have a continual process. But I think that the solutions that we're creating today, they're so divisive in the way that they're being made, and then you have an international infusion of materials as well that creates even more layers. I think this scares people when I say it, but you do know Mother Nature can fix this without us. It's hard to believe, but like at some point the carrying capacity for the types of things that we're doing is just not going to be equitable or sustainable. And nature has proven that it'll do it every time.
I was just going to add, George, that we're not the only industry that's going through this, right? If you look at fashion, they're going through the exact same thing. Where is it fast fashion, or is it something you're going to buy? Are you going to buy that $400 to $800 jacket that you'll keep for a lifetime, or are you going to buy the latest trend for $100?
It's tough when the 800 jacket fails you, I will tell you.
Well, and it's also like the 800 jacket will eventually fail you,
Yeah.
right? That's the reality. Like,
Who can
how
afford
can we think about this differently? How can we design something that lasts 5 years, that can break down or like get built into something else? And there are companies who are looking at that level of innovation. I think we have to get over this, like a lifetime. There are structures that exist today that honestly, like what they represent now is not what they were intended to represent.
That's correct.
Right? And I'm not sort of saying we should like erase like history, but like we put so much emphasis on lasting forever. You're not, like if you buy an 800 jacket, I'm pretty sure you will not have it your entire lifetime. You won't. You'll get old, you'll change your style, you'll get skinny, you'll get fat, like life happens. So if you sort of think about it not being this goal to have it last forever, like it's like we can't sort of stop thinking about like how we can like always like put ourselves on the pedestals. Oh, we're humans, we're so amazing, we design things that last forever. Trees are forever, the grass is forever, like the oceans are forever. Let that be the things that are forever. I mean, I like stuff, but
I mean, two last little things. I mean, one, it does feel like something we've been talking around a bit. It's just, what is the value we're looking at the things we build, and how do we measure it? And I feel like that is something that all of these industries hasn't quite agreed on. And I think we have all sorts of weird ways we're trying to solve it. We have like B Corps, right? We have LEED certification. We have all these sort of support structures. But at the end of the day, we are still sort of measuring ROI in terms of dollars, and everything else is a little bit up in the air in terms of like what is success or failure.
I think that as humans, there's two things that I always struggle with. Number one, we try to control nature, and we can't. I think the second thing is that we think we're going to come up with some AI-driven technology that's going to fix it. And I don't think that that's a reality either. There's an increase in population affluence and technology. There's a decrease in living. Hey, God, we need another 1,000 acres of earth. That's not going to happen, right? So there's a decrease.
You're not
capacity.
counting on Mars then. You are not counting on Mars.
Not,
Yeah.
No, thank you.
and I don't know how many people are going to be able to go either. So Mars doesn't want us, right? They're like, yeah, y'all don't come mess up our stuff. We good over here. Right? So there's a decrease in living systems and space and ability, and we've got an increase in all these other things. Like there's a margin for a business to work through. I mean, Ray Anderson talked about this years ago, and he talked about business really kind of working within that margin. And then you can either hit the wall. If you make pencils and you run out of trees, you just ran out of business, right? If you have labor issues and you bump the wall, then you're just in this thing bumping the wall all the time, making bad decisions, trying to then re-navigate to get back. You got to think holistically, what you talked about earlier. Like you got to think about the entire system of what is it that I'm doing and why, right? I think that we wait to think about that later rather than thinking about it on the front. You got to put new filters on. And I think that that's the struggle, is people are not willing to put new filters on, because the filters require you to think about communities that you don't want to think about and people that you haven't thought about, because you're over here worried about the ROI. And the ROI is not directly connected to the community that you're actually building this space for, right?
Probably a good time to mention how Whole Foods pulled out of the South Side recently in Chicago. Anybody visiting the city? Just a little heads up. That's my plug. I do want to, Sequoyah, I don't want to cut you off. I also want to open up questions, but.
Oh, sure. I'm just going to say that like capitalism has failed us. So I'm just going to sort of like, but we're in it. And we're going to have to figure it out all together. So again, that sort of leads us to like, how can we turn it over, think about it differently, reprioritize like what is of value to us.
Better take some questions.
We better take some questions, yeah, because we're going to run out of time. Anyone have a question for our panelists? Up in front. I'm not sure. Oh, yeah, we got a mic coming your way.
So I think all of the designers can probably agree that we like to design with our communities and not for them. So we like to sort of bring people along shoulder to shoulder. And I know personally it's a struggle when we look at things like gentrification and honoring a local culture without appropriating it. It used to be a really clear line, but it feels like it's gotten more fuzzy with the political divide and so on and so forth. But how do you recommend that designers navigate gentrification and honoring local culture without appropriating it so that we don't leave communities behind?
That's a great question. No, it really is, because like that's also sort of what is the roadmap. It's multifaceted, right? Because I have been on the receiving end where I sat on a planning committee and for my nation, and no one knew that I was a designer, and I was like appalled at the approach, right? Because they were just using all these design terms for people who are not like designers and they don't know, and they didn't give them sort of like they didn't listen. Right? They didn't sort of hear the catchphrases or words that people used or the sentiment, because when people start who are not designers, talk about what they want, it's about how they feel and how they want to feel. So part of that is like that active listening, but it's also like doing the research, finding the interesting things. Why is that park named that way? Like, who is that street named after? Engaging with a lot of the, whether there's a zoning planning committee, who sits on it? Who comes to those meetings? Getting involved or making yourself uncomfortable, like going to a religious establishment, asking them about like who's there, right? They know. And just like not being afraid to talk to people, but also like take cues, understanding or training from non-design disciplines. Like take a class with like that are for social workers. Take a class about community engagement. There are organizations who are boots on the ground community organizations. Interior designers are not trained that way, and we have to learn. So constantly being in a position of like, I need to learn how to engage. I need to learn to be curious. And so when you have that level and you're coming to a table where you have a little bit of understanding, you're in a state of like listening, actively listening, and you're able to then engage in deeper conversation if you know a little bit. One of my designers did a project where she was doing the presentation, talking about the history, and the development partner just all of a sudden was so excited and then started to engage back in it and then told us things that we couldn't even find information on. And this was just because there was other conversations that they had had with other community members. So it just, again, the curiosity, active listening.
Church, school, librarian.
Yes.
In the community. Oh, the barbershop.
Barbershop, beauty salon.
Barbershop, you're going to get something else too.
Yeah.
But church, find a couple of churches in the neighborhood, a couple elementary schools, and librarians in that area because they've been there. Usually you're going to find somebody who's been in that community, they know the history, they know where to point you at in the library to say, hey, here's an old map, or here's this, or here's what the community used to look like, or here's a video, or go to this page. Or you find those three in the neighborhood where you're actually going to be embedded, and you'll find some resources that you wouldn't normally be able to find. That's free.
Just don't think you know more than.
Yep.
Another
Somebody
question?
sitting out there right now, so I'm like, damn, I wish I'd have knew this last week.
Librarian was free. They're just there at the desk.
Right there at the desk.
I think we might have one or two more questions, time for them.
That's good.
Everyone's silence, no way, no way. Somebody's got a pressing question, I know it. Up here in front.
I don't have to wait for a mic, I guess.
It's like part of the ritual. We're just gonna do it.
Okay, so as we were talking about a lot of the issues that are facing the industry in general being related to the people on the ground that are actually going to be carrying out these designs and accomplishing those and then servicing them in communities later, how do we get those people excited about partnering with us in design, and how do we engage those people, even from young ages up to people that are in the trades that are of the retiring age and they're just really not wanting to reinvent the wheel at this stage in their career? How can we get them excited and on board with these kinds of approaches?
Pay them.
Yes, pay them.
So well, honestly, engage them early. Like if you know a project's coming 2 years down the road and they don't have the staff, or they're two small electrical firms inside of that city, hey, we got a big project coming for whatever, and we really are going to need your support. We've got this level of whatever, but we are looking to educate you, bring you in early, tell you what we're going to do so you can staff up and be ready, and here's the type of compensation that we're looking at. I promise you, oh, really? Okay. They'll go find 3 or 4 more small companies that you don't know about, like there's some mom and pop shops in that neighborhood, and be like, hey, Larry, Joe, Sally, we got an opportunity over here. I need to bring you in. That gives them time to pull together the resources that you need, and that makes them a little bit more connected in the community, and they're able to leverage that business other places, because now you've got a partner, and usually when you're building one building, you're not just going to build one in the city, you're going to develop some other ones. So like, you've got to take the initiative to reach out. They're there. They've been there, and they usually just been working on a few projects here and there. They got customers that are local, but the opportunity to grow and expand and develop their business and be educated, because you're going to train folks anyway, so just bring them into the pool and educate them at the same time, and it brings a lot of value to your business.
And I also think it's a kind of a cultural shift of, like the media, right? I mean, when was the last time, a design media, highlighted, featured a plumber?
Exactly.
Right, or a drywall installer? Like, we don't. We just kind of dismissively, think they will serve us, and then we panic when they're not there because, whatever the disconnect is. So I think a lot of it is also about kind of culturally changing that mindset that there is value in the whole ecosystem. It's not, just, the designers here and the clients here, and then everyone else just, it gets the crumbs. It can't be that anymore, so.
And like just another seed, there's a organization called the National Minority Supplier Development Council that certifies and verifies and makes sure that the people are businesses and established. So you don't have to go and try to figure that part out. And they're already registered with the city. So you just ask those questions, and you can find minorities that are in that area that actually have businesses that are already authenticated. So you don't have to worry about like, hey, do we have somebody who's just like over here with some tools in the back of their truck versus having a business that's established. So you can find those things readily available.
Maybe this is a little bit of a personal question, but changing the way that we have been doing things, how do you cope with that? I can figure that it's very stressful and a little bit of having a hard time trying to convince all this people to change the things that they have been doing for a long time. How do you cope with that?
Oh, I mean, I don't. I just do it. I don't know else how to say that, but it just, and I get, and if there's pushback, I sort of like take it head on. But again, I reached a personal point of exhaustion about always trying to be like, oh yes, we have to do this, we have to do good, we have to do good, we have to do good. Like, just do good, right? You just make the space for it. And again, you can, from your daily, task of, limiting your Amazon purchases, trying to shop locally, all of those little things that you probably do, personally, how can you make those small shifts? And again, I mean, it could just be, doing, low VOC paint, right? That's a small move, right? That's a small spec change. Or, using a different paint manufacturer. It's small shifts, and that actually creates a cumulative effect. If every designer started to put healthy materials, and not just ones that are sort of in that category of greenwashing and they have a little certificate, but healthy materials. Is it healthy for the people who are making it? If you just change 1 or 2 specs here and there, it adds up. So just stop asking for permission. Again, be the authority that you are for the design that you're doing.
At Interface, Mohawk, Amazon, USGBC, I have pretty much always been the only African American male in the room. You get comfortable with being uncomfortable relatively quickly, but that's in most corporate settings. So I don't know anything else, right? I've been built to actually do what it is that I'm supposed to do, and I don't have a problem with making people uncomfortable because I'm comfortable in my knowledge set, I'm comfortable in my skill set, I've been successful enough. And if I don't do it, then I'm not creating a pathway for these people on this second row to be able to have that same avenue, to be able to deliver what it is that they want to deliver. This is probably one of the most diverse audiences I've ever sat in front of to present concepts around social equity and sustainable design. So
That second row is
that's
Driven
your
by
team.
Design.
That's your, that's your squad. So I think that, and I'm all right with that, right? I mean, it's, if no one does it, then who will, right? At a certain point, you have to have some level of confidence and courage within yourself and create the skill set that you can actually go out and communicate to people and share with them. Every incremental step makes a difference. How do you convert people and get them to do something different? Because I think it's far too bad and far too late for us to be pessimistic about this process.
Yeah. It's one of those things where, if change were easy, everyone would be changing all the time. Change is hard, it's challenging, it's painful. I mean, that's why there's a term like growing pains. It's just sitting with the discomfort and being comfortable with it, just moving with it. That's really where you have to be. You have to, what's the term? You have to be nimble.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing. I think, as someone who lives in the South, it's really for me about talking to each other and not having the expectation that conversation is going to end nice. It's going to have a solution to it, right? And so that I can check off the box that I did it. I think you have to be really nervous about talking, but force yourself into having really tough conversations with people that you might not agree with, that you might not understand, and be okay with it. Like you say, be uncomfortable. It's a human condition. I think we should embrace it and be okay with it.
He was supposed to tell y'all before we got started, I got a flight to Amsterdam that I have to catch, so I'm gonna have to shoot out this door. So I don't feel like I'm running from the question.
He's running from the question. He knows. He knows I got a fastball coming for him. He's like, I gotta go.
Oh wait.
No, just a great point to wrap, especially since the second row is showing us all up. So thank you, George, Sequoyah, Khoi, for your time and for sharing all of your thoughts. Really appreciate it. I'm sure everyone does too. And have a great rest of your show.
Thank you.